Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Riley Sager is one of America's hottest fiction authors flying off the shelves today. With 5 back-to-back bestsellers and counting with Final Girls, winner of the 2018 International Thriller Writers Award for Best Hardcover Novel, The Last Time I Lied, Lock Every Door, which Stephen King praised as a suspenseful novel that will keep you up until way past midnight, Home Before Dark, Survive the Night, which the New York Times hailed as a summer read guaranteed to make your heart thump and your skin crawl, and his newest, The House Across the Lake. He takes out time from his busy writing and promoting schedule to join us. Riley, thank you so much for being here. Stephen King would go on to become one of your biggest endorsers. Going back to childhood, I assume you read him. Who are some of the other authors we could also find on your bookshelf at home?
My mom was and still is a huge reader, so there were books just scattered around the house, like just there there would be there in the bathroom would be Mary Higgins Clark there, like and the TV would be some other thing. And so like reading was just something that we did. People, it was something we did to for enjoyment. And so I was always reading. um and yeah, like this the Scholastic Book Fair. Like, did you have that when, like, just because you would get like the little flyer saying like what books they had, and then like, yeah, that was every time the Scholastic Book Fair rolled around, I was in heaven. And so I was just always reading. I started, like Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary and Roald Dahl. He was a big one. I remember distinctly reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and just being like, my mind was blown. I'm like, wow, this is a whole world I'm falling into every time I open this book, and I love it. And then, I graduated to like Agatha Christie. Like my sister started reading Agatha Christie, so I was like, I'm gonna read her too. And then like I kind of skipped from Agatha Christie to Stephen King, and then just I would read anything I could get my hands on.
When do you first remember words having an original way of playing in your imagination that then wound up on the page?
In elementary school, we would, you know, get these assignments like write a one-page Christmas short story or something. And I wrote one in the sixth grade that like was a hit among my classmates. Like they loved it. And it was a really nice feeling to be like, I just made this up. And my classmates are like laughing because like it's so funny, and like they let, and it's, God, it's probably awful, an awful story. But it just became something that this might be something fun to do. And so I would write some very serious emo short stories like in high school, and then in college. It was like, maybe I'll try a novel. And I just always was writing something until I realized you need to learn how to do it, and you need to keep at it, and you need to not let failure get in the way and all that kind of stuff. There's so many unfinished drafts of books, so many finished books that will never ever see the light of day. And I think that's how a lot of writers are. We just futz around until we make it.
Your books are very cinematic. I have to imagine that reflects at least a little bit your time as a film student back at the University of Pennsylvania in college.
I went to college as a film studies major. So I joke that like I wasn't even learning how to make movies. I was just learning how to watch movies. Like it was because I wanted to be a film critic. And it was a really sweet deal. Like we would watch a movie and then write a paper and then talk about it. And but it didn't prepare me for anything. So at the time, I did become a film critic for my university's college newspaper. I went to Penn State. They have a huge daily newspaper. So it just I was very egotistical. I think I just like walked in. I was like, I think I should be your film critic. And they were like, "Mm, we'll see. Let's try you out a little bit first." So I became like the film critic. I wrote features. I interviewed celebrities and things like that. And I just fell into journalism. And after college, I just worked full time at several newspapers. But there was one class in college. Shout out to Joan McGettigan at Penn State University. I don't think she's still there anymore. It was called Film and Literature. And I thought it was going to be, we read the book and then we watch the movie. And how easy is that going to be? And no, we didn't. It was about narrative and how this book is narrated and told, and how this film is structured and told, and why things are told the way they are. And it was this just opened my mind to all the possibilities of storytelling, and not just like telling a story, but like what is the best way to enter the story. And it was a fascinating class, and it just I owe my writing career to it, I think.
Well, that's a powerful statement. Please take viewers back, if you would, to the beginning of it all. When Quincy Carpenter, the sole survivor of the Pine Cottage murders, first emerged as the center of this story. And for those who don't watch slasher films, what historically is a final girl?
It was coined by a film critic, Carol Clover, and it's basically the last woman standing at the end of a horror movie. So if you like in Halloween, that would be Laurie Strode. In Scream, that would be Sidney Prescott. And it's a rich tradition in horror movies. And these women are like role models. Like they're not victims. They've gone through some stuff and they've been chased by mass killers, but at the end of the day, they survive. And so I really liked that idea. But I also kind of thought, what's it like 10 years from now for them? And what trauma are they carrying? And how is it affecting their lives, basically? And so, yeah, Quincy is a survivor of the Pine Cottage massacre, where she and her friends went to a cabin in the woods, and a killer shows up, and she's the only one who survived. And now it's 10 years later, and she's trying to, go about her life. She's really in denial about what happened to her. Her mantra is, I'm fine, I'm fine. And she's so not fine. She's so messed up. And then there are other final girls out there who went through the same thing that she did. And one of them shows up at her doorstep and sort of unlocks the not fine parts of her existence. And so it's a very psychological thriller. There are mind games going on. There are shifting loyalties and motivations. And it was an intense thing to write, but it was also really gratifying to write because I got all my frustrations out on the page. And journalism wasn't at its best anymore. Like every paper was downsizing, and I was caught in that shuffle. And so it was like, what am I going to do? Like literally, what am I going to do? And it's it's no secret, Riley Sager is a pen name, and so like I had published books under my real name, and my publisher didn't want any of those anymore. So I was literally at this crossroads. I was like, God, I have no idea what my future is. And then I was watching Halloween, the movie, on Halloween, the day, and I got the idea for Final Girls. And I wrote the first draft in 9 weeks.
With the time to finally focus on this breakout book, how many drafts of the manuscript did you work on before you felt ready to take it out to your agent and then ultimately Dutton, the publisher that bought it?
It was my literal my Hail Mary pass. Like, okay, if this doesn't work, I'm done writing and I'll become something, I don't know what. And so I was just obsessed with it, wrote the first draft very quickly. And then my agent and I spent several months like fine tuning it. My agent like had me like, she went through like, yeah, really deep revisions. And the best note she gave me, and one that I still keep in the back of my head today, is the character was a little bit inconsistent. And so one time in the margin, she wrote like, who is this person? And was a really great question. And I didn't really stop to think about it. I'm like, no, really, who is she? And that really informed the revisions, like to just really get it down to like the nitty gritty of the character, what she's gone through, how she's reacting to things, why she's doing some of the crazy things she's doing. And then when I got a publisher and I was working with my editor, we went even deeper. Like, Quincy has a little habit, vice really, of shoplifting. She just will steal things. And my editor was like, why is she doing this? I'm like, because it's cool. And, it makes her edgy. She's like, that's not good enough. Why is she doing this? And so I really had to think about it. And I decided, she's stealing shiny things. So she's like steal, and I realized like she's stealing shiny things because she likes to look at them and see her reflection. And it's a reminder that she still exists. And so that's the kind of thing that really, when you have an editor and an agent to just force you to come up with these ideas and these reasons, it just makes the book so much better.
To then jump from a couple years before when you were saying, what am I going to do, to now when Stephen King declares Final Girls the first great thriller of 2017. That must have been quite a thrill, given like so many of us, you grew up reading his books.
That still blows my mind. And this was 6 months before the book came out. Like, I'm still to this day don't know quite how we got a copy, to be honest. But to have that validation from someone who I'd read so much of, and he's not only like an amazing author, he's an amazing human being. And just to have him like sort of validate what I did was so amazing. And it took me a while to process. Like, when I first saw it, I was like celebrating, and then it really hit me. And then I just sort of had to go outside and have a quiet moment to myself where, like, I'll admit it, like I cried a little bit because I'm like, I might never feel this again.
It must have been equally exhilarating to achieve the dream that every author hopes to have just once, of cracking the coveted New York Times bestseller list.
The first time I made it, I was actually heading into New York City for a book event. And like, my editor was like kind of optimistic, like, you might make the list, you might make the list. And like, we were like 2 minutes away from like the Holland Tunnel. And I knew that cell phone service was not going to happen there. And so like my phone rang and it was my editor. And I was just like, I'm about to enter the tunnel. Talk quick. Did I make it or not? And she was like, you did. And I was like, yes, I'll call you when I'm out of the tunnel. So it was very strange and like brusque. And then like actually it happened again the second time I made the list, like literally the same scenario at the same time. I was like, I'm approaching the tunnel again, just tell me. So I guess like the Holland Tunnel's my good luck charm.
Yes, it can be, as long as you don't get stuck in it. Demand must have been sky high from both your fans and your publisher, I'm sure, for more as soon as this one blew up. Had you already been working by that point on The Last Time I Lied? And I understand that, like your previous novel, the inspiration for this one came partially from movies, specifically Picnic at Hanging Rock and the original Parent Trap. Is that right?
It's always hard to like follow up something. Like, I didn't know what to write after Final Girls, and so there were a couple false starts, and like, what is my next book going to be? And then again, I was watching Picnic at Hanging Rock, and it's about these schoolgirls who go on an outing to pick Hanging Rock in Australia, and 3 of them never come back, and there are no answers, basically. And I'm like, that's really intriguing, but I don't want it to be schoolgirls. I kind of like, and then I was like, summer camp, because summer camps are scary. And just the Parent Trap thing, like, it's such a, the first half of the movie is like at a summer camp, and like they're clearly twins, and they're like denying that they're twins, and there's all this like teenage girl fighting going on and rivalry. And I was like, yeah, that would be neat to explore, and then just have some of them disappear.
Once they do, did you know Emma would still be living with this dark, unresolved part of her past? And would be haunted by the disappearance of Vivian, Natalie, and Allison? And had you already figured out that she would express that through her paintings?
This is the thing about like writing books, is sometimes you have to give readers the same but different, kind of, in a way. And so because this was my follow-up to Final Girls, I wanted a similar scenario but different. And so Emma's deal is that she's haunted by what happened to these girls. She was the last person to see them. No one knows what happened to them. And that's a heavy thing to carry when, like, I think she was like 13 when it happened. And so, for her teenage years and her adulthood, to be like, these girls, my friends, I was the last person to see them, and now no one knows what happened to them. And if only I had done something different, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And so it haunts her in many ways, but the main way is she's an artist. And so she decides to paint them and then she covers them up. And that right there, I thought was like really the easiest, quickest way to show her psychological damage, really, to be like, yep, she paints them and then she covers them up with like abstract woods and trees and water. And that says she's a bit messed up and obsessed with this.
This book is a vivid illustration from a plotting point of view at how good you are at keeping the reader guessing what's coming up around the corner from one page to the next. Do you enjoy that thrill as you're writing a new book like this one? And does it ever scare you when you come up with something that you know is really going to haunt the reader?
I'm a little bit of both, actually. It's evolved. I used to be a huge outliner. And what started to happen is I would spend a lot of time outlining and not a lot of time actually writing. And then in my third book, Lock Every Door, I had that outlined to a T, and I was following the outline like, just, okay, this is how it has to be, not quite realizing until halfway through, like the outline was bad. Like this was not like the way I should be entering this book. And so I had to throw out the outline and throw out most of what I'd written and start over. And so I felt like betrayed by my own outline. And so I've now started to just be like, you know what? I'm not going to outline. I'm just going to sit down and write and see what happens.
Turning to your next bestseller, Lock Every Door, was it your original premise that this book would be based and take place in the old Manhattan apartment building like the Bartholomew? And was this building based on any real one on the Upper West Side of Manhattan?
Yeah, I always knew it was going to be this creepy old apartment building in Manhattan. And I always knew, like, I wanted to kind of use Rosemary's Baby as a springboard, like not like really the plot of Rosemary's Baby, but just the idea of like a young innocent moving into this building with a bunch of shady neighbors and what's going on here. And so like, you know, the movie Rosemary's Baby, they used the Dakota as the Bamford. And I use the Dakota as, it's very different. Like I made it sure it was like architecturally different, but like I mentioned the location in the book and it's pretty much like right where the Dakota would be located. I don't quite visualize things, but I do like to think of ways in which, not that I think like these ever think like, oh, these are going to be a movie, but I like to think of something that might look good on screen. And so like with Lock Every Door, just the whole building and this great cage elevator like going right up the center of the building, and the apartment that Jules is in and the gargoyle outside the window, like just little things that might be cool visually if it ever gets adapted.
In crafting lead protagonist apartment sitter Jules Larson, you really chose to leave a lot to the imagination in terms of description. Karen Slaughter explained to us she writes in the same style to leave more to the reader's imagination. Why did this approach work as you were crafting her and other characters that we meet in the story?
It's a weird thing, and every time I talk about it, I sound a little bit cuckoo, but I need their voice in my head. Like I don't really visualize them, but I need to hear kind of what they sound like. And they all sound different. Like Quincy sounds different from Emma, who sounds different from Jules. And once that voice, that distinct voice gets into my head, then it's pretty smooth sailing in terms of the writing. I do like to force the reader to use their imagination. And oftentimes I think what happens is people, even subconsciously, put themselves and like they picture themselves. And I just think it brings the reader closer to the action and they get more involved. And I'm also one of these people where I don't need 5 pages of description about the ceiling and the drapes and all the, you know, just give a brief, touch upon a couple interesting things. If it's important, maybe add some, like in Lock Every Door, like the wallpaper in the apartment is very important. And so like, okay, I'll spend time on the wallpaper because that literally is vital to like the plot. but like I don't care like what the, the ceilings are like.
And those golden chalice creeps you created are even creepier because that's not just an urban legend. That happens to people in real life, doesn't it?
At the eye doctor, looking through an old copy of like Time magazine or Newsweek, and they had a thing about, the illegal organ trade in India. And I was like, oh my God. And it's, people were paying lots of money for this kind of thing. And it is a crisis. Like lots of people need lots of things and there's not enough to go around. And so I'm like, yeah, that could be, I think that's what's going on in this building. And so it wasn't a matter of like, I think the reader knows going in not to trust literally any of the other people in that building. And so I knew like that could be the surprise. Like, surprise, they're all bad, but it was more like, surprise, this is what they're up to.
Lock Every Door became another one of your option projects, this time by Paramount for development into a TV series with the True Blood producers. And while it's cool to get to keep the advance if it doesn't get greenlit, what kind of temperament do you adopt when you get word of a new book being optioned, especially given there's so little guarantee that they're ever going to get actually made into a film or a TV series?
You get to keep that option money. Yeah. So that's nice.
Yeah.
And so I look at it like this will be a nice vacation somewhere further down the line. And that's wonderful. I really don't have anything to do with it. And that's like on purpose. Yeah, so far 4 of my 5 books have been optioned. And sometimes, like you mentioned, Final Girls and Lock Every Door, like those original options like lapsed. It never took, and then someone else came along, was like, we're interested. And so now it's like in a different stage of development. And so sometimes it just like, the whole process starts over again. And I just really, from the very beginning, when Final Girls was first optioned, my film agent was very honest. And he's like, X% of things that are optioned actually get made. And he was basically preparing me like, don't get your hopes up. If something eventually does get made, that's fantastic. I hope it's great. But I always think it's not going to happen. And therefore these options are it's a nice, bonus. It's like, oh, have fun here. Try to make this into something. And I think a lot of readers might see like, oh, a book isn't a success unless it's been turned into a movie or a TV show. And that's ridiculous. No, like a book is a success if you like the book. I don't feel like anything has to be turned into something.
You've drawn from cinema for muse on some of your earlier works. We understand it was actually a podcast focused on the Amityville horror case that helped spark the idea for Home Before Dark.
Yeah, I was listening to a great podcast, Stuff You Should Know, and they did an episode on the Amityville horror and how, everyone thinks, okay, it was a hoax. Like, let's all agree it was a hoax. But they swore until the day they died that it was real. And they had kids. And so that's where I thought, that's a fascinating thing. Like, what if you were like one of the kids from Amityville? And maybe you don't know the truth, but your parents never told you the truth. And that's a fascinating character. And then I thought, okay, what if 25 years later, she returns to this house? And then I got the idea, and to do like both, to like have the book her father wrote about their time in this haunted house, and then her experience 25 years later returning to the house, and then intertwine the chapters. And it was a great idea at the time. The writing of it was, oof, that was a toughie.
Talk for fans, if you would, about the relationship between Maggie and her father, which takes on a special dimension to begin with, we understand.
He's dead. Yeah. So like he's dead. No, so it's she has this grief that she's dealing with, and then she's returning to this house, and she starts noticing, okay, maybe like things are happening to her that allegedly happened to her family 25 years ago and that her father wrote about. And so she'd always thought that he was lying about this. And now she's like, okay, maybe this is the truth. Maybe this place really is haunted. And so she has it's all about kind of understanding her father more and the reasons for writing this book and for pulling off this massive successful hoax. And yeah, I just thought it would be interesting to like look at a haunting from two points of view over 25 years, but then also really make it about like this father-daughter relationship.
Well, you did it quite successfully. You head cross country with fans next in your newest bestseller, Survive the Night. Where did you want to head differently from past books with the road trip? Readers Take with Charlie Jordan and Josh Baxter.
I liked the idea of just because Home Before Dark was so complex, I wanted to be simple. Like for my next book, I always want to do something different from what I'd previously written. And so I'm like, I want to do something in real time almost.
Uh-oh.
Like more real time and simple than two people in a car. And one of them might be a serial killer and the other one is like suspecting that they might be a serial killer. And how do they react and how do they get out of this situation? And so once I got onto that kind of real time thing, it was like, okay, we're going to hit the road. We're going to go Interstate 80 because that's a highway I'm intimately familiar with from living in New Jersey now, but growing up in Pennsylvania and just driving between the two. And it was originally all going to be from Charlie's point of view, you know, like the girl in the car with a killer. But then it got me thinking, like, you know, it might be fun also to see things from Josh's point of view as well. It might be more interesting and mix things up a little bit and be surprising. And so that's why I did that, just kind of like throw a curveball. And then like later in the book, there's like more points of view from other characters. And it was me kind of experimenting with viewpoints and narrative because all my previous books had been first person narration. And for Survive the Night, I'm like, let's do third person and see what happens. And it was fun. It was enjoyable to do. My next one, The House Across the Lake, is first person, but the one I'm working on now is third person.
With your newest novel, The House Across the Lake, Rolling Stone recently declared that a master of the twist and the turn is back with his most unexpected thriller yet. Please give fans a glimpse inside what they can expect.
The House Across the Lake is a book that it wasn't until after I finished it that I was like, oh, this is a book that I literally can't talk about. Like this one is going to be very interesting because it looks like one thing, like a very familiar thing. It's about this woman named Casey. She's an actress. She was fired from a Broadway show. She's been hounded by the press. So she goes to her family's lake house in Vermont, which is where her husband drowned 14 months earlier. And so she's just a mess. She's sad, she's grieving, she's drinking, and she starts watching the neighbors on the other side of the lake. And they're this glamorous couple. He's, like a tech guy who created this fancy app. She's a former model. And so Casey becomes like obsessed with this couple across the lake. And then one day the woman, Catherine, disappears. And so there are these elements that are very familiar to readers, the unreliable narrator who's drinking too much and spying on her neighbors. And then it moves beyond that in many, many, many crazy, surprising ways. And so that's the kind of thing where it's like, wow, we can't really say a lot about this book, can we?
Is it fun for you as an author to now be part of that tradition of younger readers growing up in this generation, pulling your books down off their mom and dad's Kindle or bookshelf like you did as a kid?
You would sneak them down from the shelf. Final Girls was blurbed by Lisa Gardner, like read it like a year before it came out. And it was because like her daughter read it. Her daughter saw it like in the mail. And I think her daughter was like 15 at the time and read it and just went, Mom, you've got to read this book. And so at first I was taken aback. I'm like, ooh, I don't know if a 15-year-old should be reading that book. But then at the same time, I was thinking about what I was reading at age 15, and it's like, yeah, 15-year-olds should definitely be reading this book. So
What kind of encouragement and caution would you give to any of them who do write you on how to get started on their first novel if it's a dream they have of getting into flight?
it is a long, long haul, and you have to be prepared for that. For example, my agent, I got after being rejected by 110 or so other agents. And I got her because one agent who liked my stuff, but just didn't it wasn't quite there yet. She didn't have the time to help me like revise it. And she was like, okay, I like you. I like your book. I can't do this. I know someone who might be interested. I'm going to put in a good word for you. And just her generosity was incredible. And so that person she put in a good word with like happened to become like my agent. And so that right there was like this massive hurdle to overcome. And I think a lot of people might not be in it for the long haul. And you have to be like, if you really want it, you'll get it, but you have to work really, really hard and suffer the slings and arrows of lots of rejection. And then once that happened, like I was published, but not successfully published. And, it wasn't until I, use a fake name that until I used a pen name and that I like, I'm like, oh, now I'm like big. And I only got big because, other people were so generous, like Stephen King and Lisa Gardner and like Whoopi Goldberg talked about the book on The View. So it's not just, there's a lot of hard work involved and a lot of just blind luck involved. And so it's not a straight line toward publishing success.
In closing, once an author finally makes it into that stratosphere of success like you've had, what's the balance like you have to strike between the creative demands of a career as a best-selling novelist?
It can be difficult. Yeah, like I'm on a book a year schedule, and like right now, it's been really hard to write because there's been all these other things going on. There's like, planning the publicity and marketing of the House Across the Lake. There's like, there just are like weeks when like, okay, can we get this from you? We get this? And, and you just have to kind of balance it. And you don't want to say no to anything, but sometimes you have to just sit back and be like, I need to write. So just please don't bother me. Like, if you want a book from me, you've got to just leave me alone. And it is a tough balance. And I've gotten better at it. But also there have been times when I was like right up against my deadline. Like, here's my deadline. Here's me just smashing right into it. And so you do have to really manage your time well and know what you're capable of and know enough to be like, I cannot. That happens like with blurbing a lot. I get asked to blurb a lot of books and I feel terrible because you want to be supportive, but at the same time, you just don't have the bandwidth to read like 3 books in a week. I mean, I would love to do kind of like an Agatha Christie-esque 10 people trapped in an exotic location and they start being murdered. And I mean, Ruth Ware did a great variation on that. A lot of people have done great variations on that. That's why I'm like hesitant to sort of try it myself. I don't know. Like when you've sort of like reached the point I'm at in my career is like, you have to like think strategically about what you're going to write next, because there is like audience expectations and publisher expectations and market expectations. So it can't be like, yeah, I want to write a science fiction love story. Like, no, I cannot. I guess I could, but so you have to be a little bit more strategic and savvy about it. And so therefore, some of the ideas you most want to do, you can't quite do at the moment.
Riley Sager, thank you so much for being here and for saying hello to my wife at the end of our conversation today. She's a big fan and got a big kick out of it, as did we. It wouldn't have been complete without you. Thank you for being on About the Authors TV.
No, thanks a lot. This is fun.